Hello everyone, and welcome to Digitally Download's extended look at Remnant from the Ashes. My name is PY, and I will be guiding you on a particular look at the enemy types that can be found within the game. Before we do that though, what is Remnant from the Ashes? Remnant from the Ashes is a third-person action RPG developed by Gunfire Games, the same development team behind Darksiders 3. So if you've played one, the other is going to seem rather familiar, except this time around, instead of having to brave the apocalypse all by yourself, you actually get to brave it with one or two other people. With that said, let's dive in. So why look at enemy types? In my review, I went over the fact that this post-apocalyptic landscape is both procedurally generated and it tells a story through your actions. Now, those actions, whether they be by yourself or with others, kind of change how the story unfolds because it kind of changes how you get there. But to get there, the enemies that stand between you and the what they call world bosses are actually really cool and deserve their own highlight reel. So starting it off with your basic enemy types, you'll have your melee branch. But what makes Remnant from the Ashes a little different than everything else is not that you're going to be facing the same type over and over and over. You'll be facing variants of the type over and over and over. And while this can sound, oh hey, wait, you just recycled them, no. Actually, in this case, while you are facing variants over and over and over, each world type, you have to rediscover how to actually fight each type. So starting off on Earth, you have your basic root soldier, and they'll come at you swinging, and you basically either shoot them before they get to you, or you hack them down with your melee weapon. But what's really cool is that just because they're a melee type doesn't mean they're only a melee type. You'll only start to see subtle differences between them and another who have range capabilities. They're not exactly ranged enemies, but they have that option. And it's seeing this through the worlds that you're just like, okay, how do I face off against the enemies in this situation? As now having moved into the second world, you now have to concentrate on other body parts because enemies are now wearing skulls for helmets. So instead of being able to aim just for a headshot, you now have to concentrate on, okay, if I shoot them in the knee, they'll fall to the ground. If I shoot them in the shoulder, they might spin out and fall to the ground, giving you a little more leeway on how much time you have to take care of them. And these are just the first type. Moving on into the second type, things get a little more complicated because ranged enemies, and I mean only ranged enemies, are few and far between, though they are devastating in their own right. A little tankier than your standard mobs, ranged enemies are both more powerful and they will actually keep to their range, if not even teleport out of the way once they've taken one or two hits, making them even harder to take on. This immediately contrasts with everything from the melee tree, as while in the second world you do have certain ranged enemies, once they've thrown a javelin or two, they will charge at you. So they're not quite ranged as much as they're, like the first category, hybrid. What'll start to get thrown at you, however, because you'll see more hybrids in the second world, you have floating heads that'll basically unleash hell from above, and you have to shoot them down because they'll rarely come within melee range because they're hovering above your head and complimenting everything that is in your face trying to kill you. Moving from your range enemies into your special enemies, we finally have les pièces de résistance. These guys are big, they are bad, and while I may have said guys, they are basically gender neutral in a lot of cases, unless they're the female types of weird wasp bug things trying to kill you in the third world. Unlike the rarity of ranged units, special units tend to show up a lot more often and at the most inopportune moments for you. Mostly represented in hulking masses, at least in the beginning, these special units have a lot more health and a lot more special abilities that require more than just unloading clips into them or just several bullets. Finally coming up against something that requires a little more finesse and strategy, you'll have to plan your way through the environments when coming up against these, because sometimes it's almost better to run away, even if the loot drops are required to upgrade your better equipment as they fall off of bosses. So not only do they make it worth going up against these tougher foes, they also make it a bit of a requirement if you want to push on further. Finally, in our last look at Remnant from the Ashes, we have the bosses. While special units are big and bad, bosses are even bigger and basically even badder, as they are a true testament to your skills up to that point in time. Only ever being able to have equipment in relation to the bosses before it, the only factors that are really going to help are leveling up your traits and upgrading the weapons as much as possible. What's really neat with the bosses is that each one has an area that is specifically designed for them. Starting off with the fire-breathing dragon that I first faced off against, you're in a city square with oil patches that can be lit aflame from the fireballs that it throws in your direction, or really spits. Even other smaller non-world bosses have their own special unique spaces that increase the challenge rating because it's not necessarily them that are hard, but the environment that you find yourself within, as most of their minions make for some fairly unfair fights, especially if you're soloing. Another really neat feature is that you won't face off against every boss in your first playthrough. Bosses are actually random and picked from a pool, so me facing off against the fire-breathing dragon isn't something my brother faced, which means I got an epic fire sword and he got something there's nothing to write home about from Cthulhu Face. That'll teach him to play the PC version instead of on the consoles with me. Taking that thought into consideration, though, and jumping into other people's games, it makes it easier to see the bosses a lot faster without actually losing progression in yours. This means if you're having a hard time, you can join up with others for a bit, upgrade past what you technically should have, and then come back with a vengeance. One way or the other, how you tell that story is entirely up to you. Finally, to end it all off, because I think this is seriously going to be a me thing from now on, here is the final look at Remnant from the Ashes and my boss fails. No! Shit, I was trying to heal. Like I was trying to make my space heal. Okay.
Cover me!
I have no idea. I'm checking if we actually can. No. No, no, no!